I have always been the kind of man who dissects every detail before making a decision, the sort of person who reads every line of a contract while others only glance at the signature page, because in my world one overlooked clause can become a catastrophe. That habit defined my career as a structural systems engineer, and by the time I turned 41, it had also shaped the way I lived my personal life, carefully mapped out and insulated against unnecessary risk. I believed that discipline protected me from chaos, that preparation could shield me from betrayal, and that logic could prevent emotional collapse. For most of my adult life, that belief seemed justified because I had built a stable career, a respectable reputation, and a home I had restored with my own hands. I never imagined that the same analytical nature that saved me professionally would later become the weapon I would use to dismantle my own marriage, when the woman I trusted proved that some disasters cannot be prevented, only managed. 9 years ago, at a small dinner party hosted by a coworker in a downtown loft, I met Celeste Morgan, a woman whose presence filled the room in a way that made conversations drift toward her without effort. She was 25 at the time, radiant, expressive, and confident in a way that made strangers feel like old friends within minutes of meeting her. Celeste worked as a client coordination officer at Silverline Capital Advisors, a fast-growing firm in the financial district, and she spoke about her ambitions with a fire that made it impossible not to admire her. I had been living alone for several years, content with my routines and my solitude, but that night she disrupted everything. She laughed easily, asked thoughtful questions, and spoke about her future with certainty, as if she could already see the life she was determined to build, and I found myself wanting to be part of that vision. 4 years before meeting Celeste, I had purchased a neglected colonial home in Redwood Hills, a quiet neighborhood where many people overlooked properties that needed too much work. The house was weathered and outdated, but beneath the cosmetic flaws I saw strength and potential, the same way I evaluated aging infrastructure projects at work. I bought it well below market value, using my own savings for the down payment and signing the deed in my name alone. Over time, I restored every room, replacing worn floors, repairing damaged walls, and upgrading systems that had been ignored for decades. Each improvement increased the property's worth and made it feel like an extension of my identity, something I had earned through patience and effort. When Celeste visited for the first time, she admired what I had built, and I felt proud knowing the house represented years of quiet persistence. Our relationship unfolded with an intensity that felt deliberate rather than rushed, as if we both sensed that something meaningful was developing and wanted to protect it. Celeste was drawn to my stability, my structured life, and my ability to plan for the future, while I was fascinated by her energy, her social confidence, and the way she navigated environments that made me uncomfortable. She introduced me to a faster pace of living, while I offered her a sense of security and consistency. Together, we created routines that blended our differences. Quiet evenings balanced by lively weekends, practical discussions mixed with ambitious dreams. I felt as though I had finally found someone who complemented me, and the idea of a life together began to feel not only possible but inevitable. After nearly 2 years of dating, I proposed to Celeste at Maison Vert, a small European-style restaurant where we had once spent an entire evening talking, until the staff gently asked us to leave. The moment felt surreal as she said yes before I could finish speaking, tears streaming down her face as she called her family to share the news. We planned a spring wedding, and she approached every detail with passion and determination, turning the process into a project that reflected her personality. 2 months before the ceremony, I raised the subject of a prenuptial agreement during dinner at home, presenting it as a precaution rather than a threat. She laughed, teased me for being overly cautious, and signed without reading closely, unaware that one clause would later determine the outcome of everything we built. Our marriage lasted 8 years and followed a rhythm that felt dependable and safe, filled with shared routines, professional growth, and quiet moments that reinforced the illusion of permanence. Celeste's career advanced steadily from coordinator to senior relationship manager, while my own promotions brought greater responsibility and financial stability. We spent weekends at markets, worked on home projects together, and traveled to visit family during the holidays, building memories that felt genuine and complete. We postponed having children, believing that financial security and career milestones should come first, and I trusted that we shared the same priorities. I believed we understood each other deeply, that honesty formed the foundation of everything we did, and that our future was simply a continuation of what we had already built. 6 months ago, subtle changes began to disrupt that sense of normalcy, starting with faint traces of a cologne that did not belong to me lingering on Celeste's clothes. At first, she brushed it off as the result of long days in crowded offices, but soon other details followed. Designer clothing, expensive jewelry, late nights that stretched past midnight, and constant mentions of her supervisor, Adrian Cole, whose name seemed to appear in every conversation. Her phone became guarded, locked, and hidden from view, and she stopped responding to my calls during work hours. The woman who once shared everything with me began to retreat, creating a distance that felt deliberate and cold, as if she were slowly withdrawing from the life we shared. When physical and emotional intimacy faded, replaced by excuses and avoidance, I felt as though I were living with a stranger, someone who occupied the same space but no longer belonged to me. She no longer asked about my work or laughed at my dry humor, and the rituals we had built together dissolved into silence. Nights became restless, filled with unanswered questions and a growing sense of betrayal that I could no longer ignore. Instead of confronting her directly, I relied on logic and strategy, convinced that accusations without proof would only teach her to be more careful. I needed certainty, not reassurance, and that conviction led me to seek professional help. I contacted Marcus Hale, a private investigator recommended by a colleague, and met him during my lunch break at a quiet cafe. I showed him a photograph of Celeste and explained my suspicions with clinical detachment, providing details about her schedule, her workplace, and the unexplained late meetings that occurred several times a week. He accepted the case, quoted his fee, and promised discretion. 3 weeks later, the evidence arrived through encrypted messages, each image confirming what I had feared. Celeste and Adrian together, sharing hotel rooms, holding hands, and laughing over expensive dinners. The reality was devastating, but my mind shifted from grief to calculation, preparing for what came next. Instead of confronting her, I contacted Elaine Prescott, a respected divorce attorney, and began assembling an airtight strategy that would protect everything I had built. I installed security cameras throughout the house, documented every asset, and reviewed the prenuptial agreement in detail, confirming that its infidelity clause would leave Celeste with nothing if proven. At the same time, I arranged for an anonymous tip to reach her company's HR department regarding unethical behavior between management and subordinates, knowing the implications would be severe. Each step felt methodical and controlled, as if I were solving a complex engineering problem rather than dismantling my own marriage, and I waited patiently for the moment when the truth would be revealed. 2 weeks after receiving the investigator's report, I lived a carefully controlled performance, waking each morning beside Celeste as if nothing had changed, kissing her forehead, asking about her schedule, and listening to the lies she told with remarkable calm. Every evening she invented new explanations for working late, and I responded with understanding while silently tracking every inconsistency. I cooked meals she barely touched, sat through shows she never watched, and maintained the illusion of a stable marriage with the discipline of an actor playing the role of his life. Behind the scenes, Elaine and I finalized the legal groundwork, verifying that every clause of the prenuptial agreement was enforceable and preparing court filings that would leave no room for negotiation. I felt strangely detached, focused not on pain but on precision, convinced that emotion would only cloud my judgment. The night everything changed arrived quietly, without warning, when I heard the front door open later than usual and recognized the sound of two sets of footsteps entering my home. Celeste walked in first, followed by Adrian, his arm resting casually at her side as though he already belonged there. They expected confrontation, perhaps fear, but what they found instead was silence and preparation. I placed the envelope containing the evidence on the table and watched their confidence unravel as they realized the depth of what I had uncovered. I explained calmly that I had already filed for divorce, that the cameras had recorded their intrusion, and that the agreement Celeste signed years earlier ensured she would leave with nothing. Their reactions shifted from arrogance to desperation in moments, revealing how fragile their imagined future truly was. As they attempted to argue, to bargain, and finally to plead, I informed them of one final detail that sealed their fate. The investigation report had been delivered anonymously to the compliance department at Silverline Capital Advisors earlier that morning. The evidence included proof of company resources being used to support their affair, a violation that could not be ignored. Celeste's composure collapsed entirely, and Adrian's confidence vanished as he realized his position could not protect him. They left my home in silence, carrying nothing but the weight of consequences they had never anticipated. I locked the door behind them and felt an unfamiliar calm, as if the storm had finally passed and the damage could now be assessed with clarity. The following morning, both were summoned separately to meet with the head of compliance, where the full extent of their misconduct was laid out in precise detail. Financial records, travel expenses, witness statements, and photographs formed a case that left no room for denial. They were terminated immediately, escorted from the building while colleagues watched in stunned disbelief. Within hours, the story spread throughout the financial district, and their reputations disintegrated faster than either could comprehend. What they believed was a private escape had become a public scandal, and every professional connection they relied on turned away without hesitation. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings advanced with mechanical efficiency, driven by documentation and legal certainty rather than emotion. Celeste's attorney advised her not to contest, explaining that the evidence and the agreement made resistance futile. Within 2 months, the court finalized everything, awarding me the house, the accounts, the investments, and every asset accumulated during the marriage. Celeste walked away with only her personal belongings and her car, burdened with debts and legal fees she could not afford. 8 years of shared life ended with a signature, leaving behind silence where promises once stood. Without the pressure of secrecy or ambition, Celeste and Adrian's relationship collapsed quickly, reduced to arguments and resentment in a small apartment neither wanted. They blamed each other for their losses, each convinced the other had been careless, and eventually separated, carrying their failures into uncertain futures. Adrian relocated across the country, accepting work far below his previous status, while Celeste struggled to rebuild her life in a new city with limited opportunities. Their once glamorous dreams dissolved into routine survival, a stark contrast to the world they believed awaited them. 6 months after the divorce, I found myself sitting on my porch in the early morning, watching sunlight spill across the yard I had restored, feeling a quiet peace that had eluded me for years. The house felt like mine again, free from tension, and I had reshaped the space to reflect who I was now rather than who I used to be. My career continued to grow, and I was trusted with projects that challenged me and renewed my sense of purpose. For the first time in a long while, I felt grounded, confident that I had reclaimed control of my life. I began dating again slowly, meeting someone through mutual friends who understood the value of patience and honesty. We shared meals, took long walks, and spoke openly about past mistakes, building something new without the weight of expectations. Laughter returned to my days, and restful sleep replaced the nights of doubt that once haunted me. I realized that healing did not require forgetting, only acceptance, and that my future was no longer defined by betrayal, but by the choices I made moving forward. Occasionally, someone would ask what became of Celeste, and I would answer simply that she had moved on, leaving the details behind. The truth no longer held power over me, and the memories faded into something distant and impersonal. I had learned that some endings are necessary, not as punishment but as clarity, revealing who we are when everything we trusted is stripped away. In that clarity, I discovered strength I did not know I possessed. Now, as I sit in the quiet of my home, reviewing plans for future projects and messages from people who bring genuine joy into my life, I understand that survival is not about revenge or victory, but about reclaiming peace. I did not destroy anything that was not already broken. I simply ensured that the truth shaped the outcome. My life continues, built on intention and resilience, and I face each day with confidence, knowing that I protected what mattered most: my dignity, my stability, and my future.